Yeah. Well, this is Johnny Griffin, and I'm speaking over station WCBN 88.3 FM on your dial. It's the commercial-free radio, Ann Arbor. And I'd like to say that it's been beautiful.
The Duke Ellington Show with Dave Crippen and Michael Poole.
The Duke is on the air. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's your Saturday afternoon date with Duke Ellington. Our number one this afternoon is a very magnificent composition. In fact, it was written especially by Duke Ellington on commission from Paul Whiteman, the Dean of Modern American Music, and it's called Bluetopia. Thank you very much, Duke Ellington. And now with our music friends.
And thank you to the ubiquitous announcer who was with Duke a lot during this period. I think he had the program for about 2 years while this marvelous Treasury series was on. I was in the Navy at the time in San Francisco and enjoying fairly light duty in terms of being available. I was working in an airplane tower, and so I would usually arrange my duty so that I could get off on Saturday afternoons to go up on the roof of these permanent barracks in Alameda Air Station and listen to this marvelous live Treasury show that came on every Saturday afternoon for 2 hours, and it was really a cornucopia of Ellington's music. He was in a sort of a transition period here. Some of the really good people had left. Jimmy Blanton had died. Ben Webster had left. Of course, Cootie and one or two. Barney Bigard had left, and so it was in effect a combination of the old band and the new band. And the record band was off, so they were recording again, and they were testing out a lot of new material, and they were using quite a bit of the old book as well. But those Saturday afternoons on the upper deck of the Alameda Air Station permanent barracks were marvelous hours spent, and I really became conscious of what Duke was doing much more than I would have buying a few records, which I had done, of course. But this really was my first major introduction to Ellingtonia, and it's been a lifelong obsession, or ever since. In any event, we will be hearing a series of these over the next few weeks. There were 8 albums released by a pirate outfit called Fairmont Records in Santa Monica, California. Interesting that these were tapes that were professionally taped by Mel Torme during the war, who was another Ellingtonian as well, as you know. And let me read you a little bit of what he says about how these came about. Just prior to Duke Ellington's death in 1974, Downbeat magazine called me for a quote to be used in their issue honoring the Duke's 75th birthday. I told them that if I were stranded on some imaginary desert island, I would survive quite well as long as there were Ellington records to play. Indeed, scarcely a week had gone by without the inclusion of some of Duke's music in my curriculum, either on a professional plane or merely for mandatory listening purposes. Well, we'll read you bits and pieces of this as we go along. Let's listen to 2 in a row. We'll hear the Strayhorn hit from the early 40s. This, by the way, is on May 5th, 1945, this first side, at the 400 restaurant in New York City, which was a favorite venue of Ellington's and was a fairly posh supper club or restaurant catering to jazz bands and groups. We'll hear Clementine by Billy Strayhorn and a cover of a well-known tune of the day, which Les Brown had recorded along with with Doris Day. I almost said Dennis Day. Incredible. And then we'll hear a remarkable new piece that had just been recorded, or about to be recorded, called 3 Cent Stomp. So back to back, Clementine, Sentimental Journey, and 3 Cent Stomp.
It involves a little tune titled Clementine and arranged by Billy Strayhorn, and it is very, very bouncy, so I'm told. now here is a comparatively new tune, all instrumental this one. It's titled Sentimental Journey. And now, friends, for a little mite of musical violence, Duke Ellington and his orchestra and the 3-cent Stomp.
Yeah, 3 Cent Stomp. That was to become a favorite of the mid '40s for Ellington, and he recorded it for Columbia, and it's remarkable, a new era kind of jump tune or stomp. You heard Ray Nance on that, along with he was the principal soloist, I think. Before that, you heard a Sentimental Journey with some interesting work by Johnny Hodges, and before that, the almost traditional by now Clementine, the early Strayhorn work, which still jumps very well. We're going to take you back to the late 20s with, I think the announcer just said 18 years, to Black and Tan Fantasy, which is one of Ellington's most famous tunes, and you'll hear some great solos on that. Oh, also Tricky Sam Nanton is still very much with the band, although sounding just a bit weak, as though he will not stay with the band more than another year because his health is failing. Tricky Sam on the wah-wah trombone, the plunger trombone, and then we'll hear a lot of him on Black and Tan Fantasy, and then finally a gorgeous, almost a mini concerto for Rex Stewart, which we also heard on, I believe, on 3 Cent Stomp, or Sentimental Journey. You'll hear something called Frantic Fantasy, which is a marvelous evocation of Stewart's artistry on the cornet, and unfortunately never recorded commercially by Ellington. So this, in effect, is the first time we've heard it. So back to back, Black and Tan Fantasy and Frantic Fantasy.
18 years ago, there was written a beautiful descriptive piece of music and offered by Duke Ellington. It's just as good today as it was then, so it bears a rehearing. The Black and Tan Fantasy. Now here is Rex Stewart and his trumpet and Frantic Fantasy.
The marvelous mini concerto for Rex Stewart and his cornet called Frantic Fantasy, which is written for him by Duke and performed, I'm sure, every other day during these years. One of, aside from Boy Meets Horn, which was still requested, one of Rex Stewart's best showcases for his remarkable virtuosity on the cornet. I'll tell you a little bit more about how Mel Torme came to have these records made. He said, he's talking about his early Ellington influences. He says, having spent my early boyhood in the heart of the black, they called it colored in those days, community of Chicago, I will never forget the impact of the first Ellington composition I ever heard. It was his initial extended work, written to commemorate the death of his beloved mother, and he called the sad, haunting, dirge-like piece Reminiscing in Tempo. Written in 1935, it mirrored the frustrating, bittersweet life of the American Negro more poignantly than any of the music I've ever heard, and remains today my favorite example of Ellingtonia. When I got to know Duke personally in the late 40s, I used to pester him constantly to revive Reminiscing in Tempo and play it live for me. One night he reluctantly capitulated, and his then current band made the valiant attempt, a performance that the Birdland patrons present will not soon forget. It was a shambles. The work was peculiar to an era, the 30s, just as the band that originally played East St. Louis Toodaloo belonged to the 20s. Well, we'll give you a little bit more of Torme's reminiscences. After a couple of cuts, we've flipped the side over and we've moved to the Paradise Theater in Detroit. Now, for those of you with long memories, you'll remember that Paradise Theater is now the...
My memory is not long.
is now a very... it was originally, and then it was the Paradise Theater, and now it's gone back to the Music Hall, which is... no, not the Music Hall. I think I'll think of it in a moment. In any event, a beautifully constructed and marvelously acoustic, an acoustic marvel really, of a concert hall which had fallen into disrepair after the Paradise Theater closed. The Paradise Theater was an attempt to bring in, and very successfully during the war years, black jazz bands and black singers who normally would not make it uptown because of the still segregated policies of most large theaters, which catered to musical groups like Tommy Dorsey, Benny Goodman, and so on. And so the Paradise Theater was created to capitalize on the popularity of black jazz musicians like Ellington, Basie, Lunsford, Andy Kirk, and the rest, and to also bring in the famous black singers of the day. But it has now since reverted to its, I know now, it's Orchestra Hall. Orchestra Hall was originally Orchestra Hall, and then it fell on hard times and was turned into the Paradise Theater, and then now recovered and refurbished by a group of dedicated musicians and patrons. It is now the Orchestra Hall, and it's now featuring classical works almost every week, classical orchestras and chamber groups. It's best for chamber groups. Has a marvelous ambiance, and the acoustics have been restored to their former glory. In any event, you'll be hearing then the now Orchestra Hall, the then Paradise Theater, in this particular segment. We're going to hear a piece from the 30s, from the early 40s, called Mainstem, which is one of the first Ellington recordings I heard, and in 1941 was very much taken by it. You'll hear a series of solos. Most of the major soloists in the band will take a crack at this riff tune, and it's very exciting performance always. And then we'll hear a Juan Tizol tune called Perdido, which will feature, hopefully, if Juan is still with the band, and I think he may not be, feature his valve trombone and other major soloists. So back to back, May 19th, 1945, the Paradise Theater in Detroit, Mainstem and Perdido.
Well, now, Duke, I think it's just about time to give the folks listening in and all the folks here a little rhythm. So how about Mainstem?
Here's a little number called Perdido. number featuring Junior Raglan on the bass. Little tune called Panther, Patter.
Well, we'll hold Junior for a moment and let you know that that was, of course, Perdido, which was with some great work by the trombone trio and by the trumpet section, and which was evolving into a longish jump piece. So that ran about 5 minutes, almost 5.5 minutes, and into the late 40s and early 50s, it will be played all the way up through the end of the 50s, pretty much, with Clark Terry picking it up as a sort of a concerto, using the flugelhorn and the trumpet as his solo horns. Before that, we heard a pickup version of Mainstem. Of course, we still heard Lawrence Brown and Johnny Hodges and Rex Stewart, and I believe Ray Nance also in on that marvelous jump tune involving most of the major soloists. And as you heard the announcer say, we're going to hear Junior Raglan, who was Jimmy Blanton's replacement, and stayed for about 5 years and did a quite a workmanlike job. But he and Duke are going to revive the old Ellington-Blanton duo or duet for bass and piano called Panther, Patter. That'll be a very short piece, and then we'll hear a well-known pop tune of the day, I Should Care, and finally a tune which is about to be recorded, if it hasn't already been recorded this time, May of 1945, we'll hear In a Sentimental Mood, which I think features Johnny Hodges. So Duke Ellington at the Paradise Theater in Detroit on May 19th, 1945.
Now here's a number featuring Junior Raglan on the bass. Little tune called Panther, Patter. Duke, let's have it.